So for most of us, if we're completely honest, we have to begin to realize, yeah, there's probably a whole bunch of very subtle fears just below the surface of all the unknowns in life, of all the things that could happen that are beyond my control. Car accidents, dementia, cancer, other sicknesses, financial problems, relationship problems, something bad happening to our kids. The list goes on of things that could happen that are beyond our control. How do we live with these fears in a healthy way? That's what I want to talk about. So I want to just identify 7 that I think are some of the biggest fears beyond our control that many have. So one would be fear of growing old. That's a terrifying thing for many people. Fear of getting sick, fear of dying, the fear that those closest to me will no longer be there for me. The fear that there will be consequences that I face today for decisions that I made in the past that were not good decisions. And now the consequences are going to come home to roost and haunt me. The fear that others will destroy my reputation. And in a world of social media, people can put all kinds of garbage out about you that could just destroy your reputation beyond your control. They can spread lies, all kinds of libel, that kind of thing. And then the fear that our child will make a bad choice that will deeply affect them negatively. So I just put those as what I would say are kind of the top 7 fears for many of things beyond their control. So let me show you how complex trauma really messes with this fear thing and can cause extra problems. So to begin with, we need to say again that fear originally was designed to be a good thing. It was designed to protect us. So when we're in a dangerous situation where we could get hurt, fear is an emotion that says, this is not safe to be here. You need to get out of here. You need to go to fight or flight. Fear was designed to be a very good thing. The problem with complex trauma is that fear could not be resolved by the child. So normally in a healthy fear situation, you experience fear because you're in danger. You go to fight or flight, you resolve the problem, the fear goes away. In complex trauma, the child can't go to fight or flight. The child can't resolve the fear. The fear does not go away. So they live in constant fear. Fear now is not a good thing. Fear becomes a negative force in their life. It no longer takes them and pulls them in a direction that is going to rescue them. It begins to take them and pull them in directions that actually hurt them and hurt others and result in maladaptations that are very harmful in the long run. And so when a child can't resolve fear, the child does not want to live with this constant emotion of fear. Who wants to live with this very negative, intense emotion that's terrifying? So the brain then goes to new approaches to try and deal with the fear. It can't resolve it, so what then can it do? So a bunch of different options begin to come to the surface that many people in complex trauma try all of the options and then settle on 1 or 2 of them. So some totally repress their fear. They just harden themselves. They try to act like they have no fear. And they will engage in risky behavior to prove to others that they're not afraid of anything. The problem is that even though you repress fear, you move it from the conscious level, but you put it to the subconscious level. And your subconscious brain is the biggest part of your brain. It's the part that controls you the most. And so the fear is still controlling you. The second option that the brain goes to is to dissociate from fear, to disconnect from your emotions. So there's different ways that you dissociate. Some, They would escape to a fantasy world. So in this world, they don't feel helpless. They don't feel afraid. They don't feel hopeless. They feel powerful. They feel like they're Superman. They wear a cape. In this world, there might be no danger, or there is danger, but it never bothers them because they can handle everything. So they're always safe and secure. Now, I need to make a note here. What I have found for people who have escaped to a fantasy world to get rid of their fear is that without realizing it, they can develop a belief when they come into recovery. And the belief is that once they get healthy, they'll be a Superman. Once they get healthy, they'll never experience fear. Fear will not exist in their life. They will be competent to handle every situation. And that is actually a lie. But it comes very naturally and easily out of somebody who's developed a fantasy world in complex trauma to deal with fear. There's a third thing the brain can do, and that is develop numbing activities. Let's engage in activities that numb me out, that just cause me not to feel. And so that can be eating to medicate emotions. That can be all kinds of just, let's go to zombie land through an activity. Then another thing is, let's engage in activities that just keep us too busy to feel emotions. So if I'm distracted by constant activity and busyness, then I won't feel my fear. So let's be a workaholic. Let's constantly be doing something. We can't sit quietly because then we would feel fear. Then another one is, let's find things that medicate our fear. So some people find drugs and alcohol, sex, other activities that just medicate fear. And so the brain is again looking for ways to try and not feel the emotion of fear. There's a third thing that the brain does when it can't resolve fear and it doesn't know how to get rid of fear. It then becomes hypervigilant. So if I'm constantly on alert, I'm hypervigilant, then I will spot danger. And maybe the more I can spot danger, then I will have less fear because I will be able to be proactive to prevent being in dangerous situations. What can happen though with that is that they're constantly focusing on the negative. Every time they're in change or in an unknown situation, they then go, something bad's going to happen. I need to just focus on negative. Then they start to obsess on negative. Then they start to anticipate fears. They begin to read danger into situations where there isn't danger because they just want to be prepared for everything. So let's read in danger, even though it might not be dangerous, just to be safe. But what you end up doing is creating in your brain something that you're trying to prevent. You create, I must be in danger all the time, belief in your brain. That's why I have to be hypervigilant. So now I'm always acting based on life is dangerous. And you're actually creating fear. So that one doesn't work. But then complex trauma creates underlying issues that actually feed fear. So you're trying to deal with fear, but you don't realize that there's other things that just keep feeding fear over and over constantly in your life. So shame. Shame is basically a fear emotion. It's basically, I'm not good enough. Anybody that gets to know the real me will reject me. So every time now I'm in a relationship, I feel fear because I'm pretty sure that if they get to know me, they're going to reject me, and that's scary. So shame is constantly feeding fear in a person. That then leads to codependency that comes out of complex trauma. I need you to like me in order for me to feel good about myself. I need you to meet my needs, but you can't see the real me because I'm pretty sure you're going to reject me. So we're going to do this constant dance. And I'm hoping that you're going to meet my needs. I'm hoping that you're going to want me and like me, but I'm pretty sure you won't. And that creates fear. So codependency is basically relationships that are formed that have shame and fear at their very core. And then what comes out of complex trauma for many is a fear of failure. So failure is not a good thing where I learn from. Failure is always a bad thing that leads to more pain because I get judged and criticized and condemned and shunned. So I'm constantly needing to be perfect. I'm constantly needing to make everybody happy. And so I set unrealistic standards for myself. That just creates more fear because I can't be perfect. I can't meet those standards. Another thing that comes out of complex trauma is I put my value in the wrong things. I don't believe I have inherent value, that I'm not valuable just the way I am. The only way I have value is through externals, through my accomplishments, through my body. So if my value is based on having the perfect body, what happens when I'm getting older? That creates fear. If my value comes from my accomplishments, which then becomes my job, what happens as I face retirement and I no longer have my job to give me value? Who am I then? What will my source of value be? That creates fear. If my value comes from my possessions, from my wealth, my money, what happens if the economy changes? What happens if my financial world gets upset? That creates fear. So every time I place my source of value in externals, I create an environment where fear is going to be fed whenever anything changes. Another thing that comes out of complex trauma is trust issues. And so think of it this way. What enables a child to be at peace and not have fear? It's not because they have all kinds of tools. It's because their parents that they've connected with and that they know love them have tools, and they trust their parents. And because they trust totally, they have peace. They don't have fear. So trust becomes an important piece when it comes to dealing with fear. Now, what happens as the child gets older is they learn the tools from their parents so they can handle more and more situations, so they begin to trust themselves. For some people, there's a spiritual component to this where they trust a higher power to help them in situations. But trust of others, of self, of higher power becomes key in dealing with fear. But what happens with complex trauma? It destroys trust. You don't even trust yourself. You know you don't have tools. You don't like yourself. You don't like the decisions you've made in your life in the past. And so you just stop trusting others, yourself, a higher power, and now you're basically facing the world alone with no trust, no tools, and that feeds fear. Then there's another element to complex trauma, and that is initially in complex trauma, you go to fight or flight whenever there is fear, whenever you're in danger. But then what the brain does to try to protect you is it goes to fight or flight whenever it has an uncomfortable emotion, whenever it has a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of depression, a little bit of sadness, anger. Any emotion that is uncomfortable the brain is pretty sure it's going to lead to a dangerous situation. So now instead of going to fight or flight whenever there's danger and there's legitimate fear, it now goes to fight or flight as soon as it feels an uncomfortable emotion. Let's get out of here now. Let's get out of here early because we're pretty sure it's going to go to danger. So what is happening with that is the brain is tolerating uncomfortable emotions less and less. Your capacity to sit in an uncomfortable emotion is diminishing. So now, the minute you feel an uncomfortable emotion, you get antsy, you get panicky, you want to get out of here, you want to escape. So that comes out of complex trauma. Now, every emotion actually is causing you fear. Then there's one other thing that comes out of complex trauma, and that is this. What happens in dealing with fear is we can deal with fear if our stress level has been fairly low, if we're well rested and we have lots of energy. Because of those things, our emotional gas tank is full, our bandwidth is broad. We're able to handle stuff a whole lot better because we have good energy, good resources available to us. But what happens if we're stressed out? What happens if we're exhausted? What happens if we're feeling overwhelmed? The slightest little thing causes us to just want to run. The slightest little thing creates fear. We just don't have the bandwidth to deal with it. It's too much. And so for a person coming out of complex trauma, their stress system is easily activated. They get overwhelmed easily. They're exhausted frequently. And so it leaves them in a state that actually feeds fear, that just puts them in a place where they just want to get out of here. So what I want you to see is complex trauma takes this whole good emotion of fear and basically makes it a bad emotion, and then creates all kinds of systems to try and help deal with it, but actually make things worse. They actually end up feeding fear, and fear becomes this thing that is getting worse and worse, and I can't resolve. It's a growing monster.